I would like to discuss about how to have functional romantic relationships when you have a childhood of dysfunctional relationships between your mother, father, could be your mother with partners or your father with partners. And you were introduced to, at a very young age, you were introduced to dysfunctional ways of relating to a romantic partner. So, I had a friend growing up whose mother had many sexual partners, and they would come and go. And I remember one time I was sleeping over, and she lived in an apartment, and her mother was in the loft, but the loft was like completely open, and there's a staircase that would go in the living room. And the first time I ever heard sex was I slept over. We were sleeping in the living room on the couch, and I could hear from the loft, which was above us, which is basically open, sex sounds. And when me and my friend kind of researched this guy, we found that he was wanted for some kind of, it was like sexual, some kind of sexual conduct with a minor, and there was like several like being wanted for different things, and we were like, whoa. And then, later on, my friend's mother was like dragged out of her house by the guy that evidently he was waiting for her outside the apartment. He like dragged her into the car, and there was this whole ordeal about that. And he would also like pour something into her gas tank to like completely ruin the engine. And it was just some real dysfunctionality, like real time. And there's some people who have that kind of background. Or let's say you have a father who was like he was a player, right? Where he would have, a woman every month, or he had the flavor of the month, and he was like real, like, kind of nonchalant about having all these women and stuff. And, let's say, you're getting older, right? As we always get older, right? And you're like, what? I would like to have a functional relationship that is of love, right? Because, let's say you grew up and your relationship between your mother and father was completely transactional. Like, it was just about, like, money, right? Or it's just sexual, like, where they just kind of, there was a guy around, and they would just, they'd have sex with the mother, and the mother had multiple men, right? That kind of awkwardness, right? And you're growing older, and, that stuff affects us, right? And it can create in us this feeling of low self-worth, where we don't feel like we're good enough to like have a loving relationship without like this extra like dramas, right? Like this transactional stuff, this conditional love, or this just purely sexual love that that lust turns to hate type of thing, or there's just constant like resentments or conflict, or this distrust, right? That kind of manifests through having a childhood where you were introduced to these type of like dysfunctionalities, right? In the way that we relate to love, like I've mentioned. I mean, my story is pretty much like dysfunction of dysfunction, right? And some people, they don't even recognize that's really toxic, or that's very dangerous, or it's very, very destructive, because maybe they grew up in that. Maybe that's all they know, right? So it's like, when that's all you know, how do you change the relay, right? And let's say you grew up and your father like wanted you to have like sex very young, and he would like, oh, go have sex with this girl, like she's hot, or go have sex with this other girl, and go have sex with whatever the thing is. And you grew up with that kind of like mindset, like, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to do that. And now that you're older, you're like you're questioning, right? When we get a mature mind, we start to question things like, I don't know if this is really what I want, right? Because when you have like toxic relationships, we'll say, where it's just purely sexual, purely transactional, a lot of resentment, a lot of conflict, a lot of like drama in the way that, I wouldn't say like toxic relationships are to trigger you to grow, right? But if you don't grow, you just stay stagnant in them, right? And usually it's like codependent. Usually there's a lot of, it actually just keeps you at a low self-worth, right? Basically, toxic relationship keeps you at low self-worth. But we cannot manifest greater excellence, creativity, prosperity in low self-worth. So it kind of like puts you in this position where it's like you start to feel like your creativity, your prosperity is like plateauing, or it just becomes really like stagnant, right? That's kind of what I see as toxic relationship, where you're like, it's really stagnant in the way like there really is no growth, right? You know, we can't grow without nourishment, right? Nourishment is what helps us to raise our self-worth when we feel nourished and supported and loved, and that kind of reciprocity. And I think the word toxic really implies that there's just a lot of restlessness, anxiety, a lot of fears, um, a lot of just aggressions, right? And I think when we start to raise our self-worth, we start to kind of go within and start to, again, take responsibility for these relationships. First thing, we start to accept, kind of the things we've went through, mistakes we've made, right? And then we start to ask questions like, how can I transform this? How can I transmute this? How can I heal this? Right? We start to have a vision, like, we start to have dreams or meditation, like, man, I would love to have a loving romantic relationship that's peaceful, that's just so relaxing and full of friendship and trust and, full of kindness and respect, right? And let's say your whole childhood was not like that. Like my friend's mother, like her partners were completely disrespectful, completely didn't even value life, right? And I think, you know, like for example, I had another friend whose mother was like an alcoholic, right? And she became an alcoholic, really heavy, and her mother, has deceased because of alcoholism, liver failure. And that kind of stuff, like how, we wonder how can we move through that. And I think in this particular situation, again, it's in more of a deep, very dysfunctional kind of, trauma, right? Trauma, right? And I think it's the will to be able to go through the healing and to be devoted to your healing. Because when, again, you have that in your childhood, and you have that in a mindset, and maybe you have that in your sense of core self-concept, you need a lot of energy to move through that. And some people don't have the energy or the courage or just this sense of self-encouragement, right? We're always looking for encouragement outside, but really we need a self-encouragement. So if we can create a self-encouragement, a really, really willful one, and really put some energy around that, some athleticism with our mind, with our movement, we can transmute these things. But it takes, it takes, it's like if you're trying to create a new momentum, initially, it's like kind of like going, like, I imagine like rehab, like, for like alcoholism or something. It's not necessarily going to be easy, right? But if you have a self-encouragement, a vision, right? Because I think a lot of people, they don't have a vision, right? When you really have a vision of like the kind of person you really want to step into, or the kind of reality you really want to, like, it's just full of joy, right? I think that is enough to really get us through whatever it is we need to get through. Because sometimes when we're going through things, it doesn't necessarily look pretty, right? when we're healing, right? Healing, it doesn't necessarily look pretty, but as long as we have a self encouragement and a space for us to really invite in a courageous thought or creative thought or an intention to really experience reality in a more peaceful way, I think that we can be able to transform anything. And I think that's the Buddha mind. With Buddhism, it's like we are a projection, right? We're not our mind. We're not the sum of our, the sum of our pieces. We are that projection. And that projection can change. It can be modified. It can be shifted. It can be put, you can drop in a higher frequency and it can completely sort of upgrade itself. So that's why self-encouragement is a higher frequency, and you need a higher frequency if you're trying to, like I said, you want a healthy relationship and all you know is like unhealthy relationships in your past. That negative mind or that fear state or that low self-worth will give you so much poison, so much lies for why you're not good enough, why you can't do this, you did that, da da da. And if it's trapping you, and if it's creating a judgment in you that is taking away your life force, that is not real. It's a non-reality. What is real is the self-encouragement that tells you that you can, through a purification process, through a character development, kind of like an initiation or rite of passage, you can begin to kind of unlock higher energy and use that to help you create a quantum leap. And this is the time in the Aquarian age is now. People can create quantum leaps, and people are doing it. Deep poverty into prosperity, past, childhood of great trauma into an adulthood of great being, a healed state. But there's a self-encouragement that we have to have, because when we go through it, the karma or whatever it is, if you don't have that self-encouragement, you can easily allow the poison and lies to be dropped into your mind and create all kinds of like confusion, all kinds of delays and traps and sabotage, right? Because your subconscious, if it's soaked in these type of dysfunctionality or this childhood wounds or whatever it is, traumas, it's going to kind of, it's there. And when you expose it, that's when it really comes out. And you got to go through those emotions. But you want to go through them in a way where you're not getting trapped, where you're not getting in a sabotage, where you're not getting in a dwelling, in a locked door with it. You want to go with it with a higher energy beside you, right? Which is the athleticism, right? Beside you, which is the movement, the ability to kind of to go through it in a way of not haggering into it or getting drained in it or confused or sucked up into it, but in a way of like transmuting it, in a way of intentionally wanting to purify or heal or sort of transform in a way of a vision, the vision of healthy, happy, holy relationship. And then allowing that athleticism that you're creating, a momentum, right, through a kind of spiritual practice, right, or an awakening, right, a heart awakening, an alertness, an intuition, awareness to be that kind of continued push, that kind of, even when you're fighting and like resisting, to continue to push you. And I think that's how we can rewrite the karmas of our childhood that's replaying through us, and the karmas of past lives into our favor, not into our trapped demise, poisoned lies that we were soaked up into, that just puts us in low self-worth, where we have no growth. Your mind, your Buddha mind, wants you to have growth. It wants you to have awareness, and it wants you to learn your lessons. It doesn't want you to just say, okay, well, I'm not good enough, and it's too far gone, and yeah, my mistakes, and I'm just going to live in judgment and just prison of my own mind. Your mind your Buddha mind wants to liberate you, and will find ways to liberate. And I think the self-encouragement is very important, and also self-encouragement, it puts it on you. A lot of times when we're in this like great sadness or grief, or like we really, we're in this karma or something, it's like we want so much to latch onto something external, right? We want so much, like, it's, that comfort, that validation, that support. But a lot of times when we're really doing some deep karma clearing, it really is within us. We have to create a really good relationship with ourselves, in order for us to really eventually attract a support system that gives us growth or creativity or expansion. But initially, we have to be the one to sit with ourselves, to be honest with ourselves, to alert ourselves, to sensitize ourselves, and to start to, tap into a vision of what kind of reality is. It really just makes us feel like peace, makes us feel like really worthy, and makes us feel like just this intense joy. And I'm telling you, dysfunctionality, toxic relationships do not make us feel intense joy. It makes us feel neurotic, confused, chaos. It makes us feel depressed. It makes us feel drained. You know what I'm saying? So that intense joy, when you have such a feeling of it, or a sense of it, or a desire for it, the self-encouragement can get you there, right? But you have to have a kind of athleticism, some kind of awakening to what that intense joy is, right? If you don't even have a sense or awakening of that intense joy, it's like you don't have a target, you don't have an aim, like you don't have a direction, you don't have a sense of leadership of like a sort of a, what do you call, catapult, right? So when you're going through, the awakening of whatever grief or pain or trauma, and you have that kind of vision, right, that intense joy, and you start to kind of connect to that Buddha mind, that projection that is not of judgment. It's not of, I am set in this, I am set in that because of I went through this, and I went through that, and that's who I am. When you start to become an identity, we'll say nameless, you become shameless, right? And you start to understand that, nameless, shameless is like a great opening to, well, I can kind of, through a purification process and through creating a momentum of dharma, or a momentum of creativity, or momentum of gaining kind of a merit, right? Gaining some kind of merit, I can completely sort of reconfigure whatever these pieces of my childhood or my adulthood or whatever it is into more of a rhythmic mandala that is actually of a reality that gives me that intense joy that I sense, that maybe I've had some kind of interaction with or some kind of awakening to, but I can actually sort of put my mandala into that exact figuration or rhythm of that intense joy, so that it can drop in and it can actually have a place in this embodiment to be able to function. So I just wanted to share this because I know there are people, such as, I've known friends who have had such just dysfunctional, like I've said, like men who are like dangerous men around, and these sex partners, and then parents have alcoholism and they've died because of that, and all these type of things. And there's a lot of people in this world who can just easily just kind of fall into that like, this is who I am, right? And get really judgmental and get really trapped. And there's a lot of trapped souls because of that childhood stuff, where they're relaying the karmas that their parents experienced and even repeating the same kind of mistakes of the parents, right? And they get really harsh on themselves, very judgmental of themselves, full of guilt and stuff. And I think with this Aquarian age, this is the time for quantum leaps for anybody who has not only the will, but the athleticism. And if you don't have the athleticism, that's something we can create. That's a thing. Anybody, I mean, everyone has their own different kind of version of that, but anybody can have a spiritual athleticism, right? Mind athleticism. But it's a momentum you have to be willing to create. And sometimes for some people, it takes lifetimes. But I think when you have that vision of intense joy, right? Like we work best sometimes when we have like a vision board, or some kind of idea of like a reality that we really want to drop into. Either it's like, we work so hard because we want to go to Harvard, or, that's our vision, or we want to move to Maui, or that's our vision, or we want to, finish our PhD or have a relationship, whatever it is. When we have that, just a dream of intense joy, a lot of times that is the thing that can really pull us out of this trapped thing. And the self-encouragement is that voice inside of ourselves that we program to override the other voices that are poisonous and that are lies, that give us no energy, that keep us trapped, keep us judgmental, and keep us in these kind of like low self-worth where we're sabotaging again and again. Like, right? And then feeling the guilt and the regret, and it's just never ending, right? The self-encouragement is something that we have to program. We have to program in the mind. We have to put a higher frequency into that self-encouragement, and then that self-encouragement will literally be the overriding thing that whenever we get too far into that low self-worth, dropping in negative mind, it can kind of create a neutralizing movement that will kind of flush out that system through the positive mind wave, and then kind of do that flushing, that kind of you want to flush in a higher frequency as much as possible, especially if you're really in that low self-worth, right? But that low self-worth, if your subconscious is really heavy loaded in all that kind of whatever, I'm not good enough stuff, you're going to feel heavy loaded in that. So that's why the purification process is very important, because you got to flush through that subconscious that's heavy loaded, this higher frequency, so you can kind of even it out, right? You can even out the load between the negative and the positive mind, right? And the self-encouragement is almost like a pat on the back. Like, how many times do you pat yourself in the back, like the small accomplishments, like just a victory of the day when you didn't drink alcohol today, unless you're alcoholic, right? Or you drink like prune juice instead of alcohol, right? Those little things when you pat yourself in the back, or you taking a bath and you said you did good today, right? Or even if you don't think you did, but that kind of self-encouragement, that kind of positive ego, positive affirmation, in the way that when you really feel sincerely that you are, really kind of moving towards an authenticity within your nature, it's really good to develop a positive ego. You say, yes, I did good today, right? I'm so awesome, right? I'm so awesome. And I think because this world, there's poison and there's all kinds of lies, and the way that is soaked in our subconscious at a very young age, that, we're not good or ugly or whatever it is, I think the most radical and life-changing thing that we can do is put in a positive ego that overrides the whole entire setup of the subconscious mind, that introduces into the subconscious mind like seeds, little seeds that we plant here and there every day, of like these flowering ideas of beauty, of grace, of gratitude. And we continue to water these seeds in the subconscious. As soon as you know it, that sort of lethargic layer, darkness in the subconscious becomes this beautiful flower-filled realm, right? Of all these seeds that we dropped into the subconscious through a meditation, or just through a self-hypnosis, or even through just an intense awakening or intense joy or intense sensation of love, or I am worthy of love, or honesty that overrides the lies, where you say to yourself, you know what, courage over discouragement. As soon as you know it, that subconscious, it starts to become more of the prevailing load, or the prevailing movement starts to move more towards a neutralized position, a transmutational position, rather than a heavy loaded in like the childhood phobia position. And that's the power of this Aquarian age. That's the power of all these technology of the mind and the soul is here now for many people. But the thing is, people, the self-encouragement has to do with the people have to do it themselves, right? Even Yogi Bhajan said that, a guy offered him $1 million to clear his karma. And Yogi Bhajan said, no, I cannot do that. I could not do that even if I tried. Right? People have to want it enough. And that's where the intense joy is like, once you're presented this intense joy in like a dream or a vision, or, meditation or whatever it is, you have to, once you get that, it's like you have to want it enough. Right? And you'll get there. Even if you don't know what you want, but if your vision is like stepping into creativity or prosperity or healing or being a healer, or something, you don't even have to have it, because it's always shifting. What you want 10-20 years from now, it will shift into even something more expansive. But just a vision of intense joy that has to do with your awakening to your gifts, your talents, your authenticity, and that kind of wow, right? That maybe it's triggered in you because you met someone, a teacher, a friend, a healer, a leader, and all of a sudden that the expansion that they've had within their own life all of a sudden triggers you to that intense joy. You're like, oh my gosh, this is actually possible. This is real. Oh my God, I'm going to, oh my gosh. And that intense joy just kind of just opens up the entire subconscious and blazes through that and drops in this really deep seed of wanting to experience your awakening, wanting to experience your victory, wanting to experience the ability to have a mastery over your own self-worth. Your childhood does not decide your self-worth. Your parents don't decide your self-worth. Your society does not decide your self-worth. Your religion, your ethnicity, nationality. What decides your self-worth is your willingness to grow. And sometimes we stall our growth. We delay our growth because of the subconscious. It wants to keep us in what is known, right? Keep us locked into that reptilian brain, which is the part of us fight or flight, the part of us that just seeks survival, safety, comfort, sex, money, food, and water. But the frontal lobe, the neurocortex, is that part of ourselves that's looking toward the intense joy and seeing how we can expand, right? So sometimes we have the battle, the reptilian brain, the frontal lobe, reptilian brain, frontal lobe. But I think when we start to create a sort of mastery over the self-worth, right, through our direct interaction with our mind, right? So many ways to do that. We're going to start to kind of see the mastery of our self-worth is not coming from the subconscious, not coming even from the will, from the mind, not even really from the soul. The mastery over the self-worth, it comes from the opening of the projection, the unlocking of that. It's almost like there's a set, you feel like your projection's set, right? It's the unlocking of the projection that happens that allows you to all of a sudden redefine your self-worth, not from a place of your childhood, your mother or something, but from a place of inspiration. When you've unlocked that projection, there's an inspiration that you have, right? Because you're flushing through this whole like infinity, this whole unknown, this nameless, like, whoa, so much like intense joy or creativity or, you know, reality that I could step into. And it's like the inspiration is like the the awakening to the fact that you are a sovereign being. I think that is really when you unlock the projection, which is what you think is said and you this way, and I'm written to be, it's my fate. You unlock it through some kind of awakening, through the mastery of self-worth. The thing that really becomes that kind of real self-encouragement, or that real sense of personal freedom, is that sovereignty. That, again, that sovereignty you feel when you become nameless, when you start to realize, I'm not this and that, I'm so many things, but I'm also so many things that are kind of shifting too. And then you start to that sovereignty starts to manifest through the shameless. It's really hard to have sovereignty when you feel ashamed, when you feel shameful. Sovereignty manifests through the feeling, the shameless, the nameless, the shameless. And then the sovereignty, you through a death practice, after a purification practice, you start to have a fearless, where you start to, your expansion of the intense joy starts to become this this desire to want to not only serve your soul, but serve those who also feed soul, right? The Dharma, right? And then that again starts to create this merit where you're starting to feed the soul, nourish the soul in yourself and in others. That you start to create these new connections, new relationships that just start to trigger within you more opportunities to feed the soul. And I think that's how we're able to really bring this feeling of purposeless or a feeling of broken into a feeling of rehabilitation, into a feeling of service to something that is beyond us, but is also within our own projection. And I think something that's beyond us that is also within our own projection is the growth, the healing, and the passion we all have towards creativity. So if we have enough of that kind of intense joy, that vision, enough of that self encouragement that you find through isolation or find through meditation or find just in you getting honest with you and no more buying into poison or lies and being trapped into that, in the judgment of that, you can actually have enough self-encouragement to really go a distance in a lifetime. Go a distance. But it's not something a healer can do, a leader can do. It's something that we have to be willing to kind of sit within ourselves and lead within our own awakening.